coastal charm of South Carolina, a story unfolded that would captivate the nation. The mysterious disappearance of Heather Rachelle Elvis. Nestled in the heart of Myrtle Beach, Heather's life was a blend of southern warmth and vibrant dreams, until an unexpected turn of events led to a puzzle that still echoes through the quiet seaside town. Heather, with her vivacious spirit and dreams of a brighter future, was a beloved daughter and sister. Her magnetic personality left an impression on everyone she met, but as the story unfolds, we'll discover that beneath the surface, some secrets and twists would shape the narrative of her life. Heather Rachelle Elvis was born on June 30, 1993, in Horry County, South Carolina, to Terry and Debbie Elvis. She was described as determined, the life of the party, free-spirited, and had a huge personality. She enjoyed doing makeup and wished to pursue it as a career. Heather was a talented, cheerful, and supposedly happy 20-year-old girl. She was very artistic and would frequently share her thoughts and interests on social media. Heather was known to be a bit rebellious as she lived her life the way that she wanted to and didn't waste any time caring about what other people thought about her. After graduating from St. James High School in Murrells Inlet in 2011, and eager to experience her independence, her parents allowed her to move into her apartment in Myrtle Beach with her best friend Brianna. To support herself while studying cosmetology, Heather had 2 part-time jobs, one at the House of Blues in North Myrtle Beach and the other at a Scottish-themed restaurant called the Tilted Kiln in Myrtle Beach. She had a good job, great friends, a tight-knit family, and everything in her life seemed to be on track. But like every 20-year-old girl, there were secrets and things that her family did not know about and would not find out about until it was too late. One day in the summer of 2013, Heather was working her usual shift at the Tilted Kiln when an older man caught her eye. This was the maintenance worker, Sidney Moorer. Sidney was a 37-year-old married man who had 3 children. His wife, Tammy, was a 40-year-old stay-at-home mother and a part-time travel agent whom he had been married to since 1997. Sidney had his own maintenance company and would come by to repair things in the restaurant's kitchen. It was no secret that Heather had a crush on Sidney, even though he was much older, and the two of them would engage in harmless flirting at work. Heather would tell her friend Brianna about what he said to her and what they did. She was completely smitten with this man. Heather, who was also very active on her social media accounts, was not shy in tweeting about her feelings towards Sidney. On June 12, 2013, she tweeted, "I got a taste for older men." On July 7th, 1 month later, she tweeted, "The guy who builds things at my job makes me want to cream myself." On the same day, she tweeted, "One of these days I'm going to drag that man into the mop closet and have my way with him." It soon became clear that Sidney was also attracted to Heather, and the two began an affair. Sidney would often bring Heather coffee and bagels when she was at work, even on his days off. They would text each other back and forth, and the relationship soon turned physical. At 7:12 p.m. on July 10th, Heather tweeted, "Baby did a bad thing." A minute later, she followed up with, "I'm in way too deep, but watch me get in deeper." Heather was head over heels in love with Sidney. She told her sister how much they loved each other and how they saw a future together. Throughout the affair, Heather was aware that Sidney had a wife. However, Sidney had told her that he was in an open marriage and was no longer in love with Tammy. He even claimed that Tammy had a boyfriend of her own, and they were only living together for financial reasons and the sake of the kids. Being young and naive, this was exactly what Heather had wanted to hear, and she believed every word. Her friends didn't approve of their relationship because he was 17 years older than Heather, and on top of that, Sidney was a married man. He had been married for 15 years, to his wife, 40-year-old Tammy. The affair was not a secret at Heather's workplace, and she would often be teased by her colleagues. The situation began to get out of hand, to the point where some colleagues wrote on a mirror at work, "Stop f***ing a married man, okay thanks." One of the girls also phoned the restaurant posing as Tammy looking for Heather. Heather panicked and left work straight away thinking that Tammy was going to show up at any moment. Their affair lasted until September 2013, when Heather tweeted, "Once upon a time, an angel and a devil fell in love. It did not end well," referring to her relationship with Sidney. Tammy found out about the affair, and it's not clear how she found out, but she did, and People close to Heather said that once the affair had been discovered by Tammy, it was like all hell broke loose. Soon after discovering her husband's affair with the young waitress, Tammy phoned Heather saying, "You're going to end it with my husband." Tammy then put Sydney on the phone and listened, while Sydney began to tell Heather that she meant nothing to him, that it was over, and that she was just someone who spread their legs, amongst other insults. That greatly knocked Heather's confidence and self-worth. Over the next few weeks, she tried to focus on rebuilding herself and directing her sights on her goals and work. Tammy, however, was only just getting started. Tammy forced Sydney to get her name tattooed above his crotch and was overheard telling him, "Well, this wouldn't have happened if you didn't mess around with that girl." She would also handcuff him to the bed at night so that he could not sneak out. Over the next few weeks, Tammy continued to send nasty texts to Heather, and she even once called Heather 40 times in a single day. Heather believed that taunting Tammy was the best way to deal with the situation, saying things like, "Why are you texting me? You should be worried about your husband." Tammy would take it a step further and send Heather pictures of both Tammy and Sydney in bed together, getting intimate. Tammy continued to contact Heather asking, "Hey sweetie, ready to meet the missus?" Heather responded a couple of days later on November 1st saying, "I think you're a little obsessed with me. No need to worry about me anymore." On November 5th, Tammy responded, "By the way, Dad no longer owns a phone," referring to Sydney's lack of a phone, which prevented her from contacting him. Tammy also tried to get Heather fired from the Tilted Kilt, calling the restaurant every day and telling them that Sydney would no longer fix things as long as Heather was working there. It was also reported that Sydney texted Heather again, saying that Tammy wasn't entitled to feel the way she did about the affair and act the way she did because she too had a lover, but this turned out to be a lie. They both agreed to call it quits because nothing good was coming from it. Heather, on the other hand, told Sydney that she wanted Tammy to stop calling the restaurant because she lost hours of work and was sent home because Tammy kept calling. Heather and Sydney last saw each other on November 5th after they agreed to end their relationship. On Twitter, she retweeted a tweet by a comedian that you could say was a little personal. The tweet read, "Hey married fellas, you can either cheat on your wife or murder her. Never both, because that is when you get caught." Heartbroken, but remaining determined to move on from the situation, Heather continued to work on herself, with those close to her commenting on how she had got her smile back. Things also started to look up for Heather when she was offered a job in a beauty salon. She was one step closer to her dream job. As for the texts and calls from Tammy, Heather began to get used to them and continued to ignore them, thinking that Tammy would eventually get bored and move on. On November 19th, Sydney and Tammy decided to buy a brand new black Ford F-150 and drive to California with their children to visit Disneyland as a way to rekindle their romance, whereby the trip lasted 3 weeks. Meanwhile, despite Heather's life taking a turn for the better, it would not be long before those around her began to notice that she was gaining weight, so much so that she had to be given a new uniform at work as her usual one no longer fit. Heather went from having a size A cup size on her bra to a size C cup, and she also went from a medium-sized skirt to a large. These are all changes that are typically associated with someone pregnant, so finally Heather took a test at work one day, and it came back invalid. It is not known for certain whether or not Heather was pregnant, but it was considered a very strong possibility given the changes in her physical appearance and the fact that she was known to be having a very intimate relationship with Sydney Moorer. Her confidence was coming back, and she organized a date with a guy who was closer to her age that she'd been talking to for quite a while. Things were looking good for Heather. It was 17th of December 2013 when Heather headed out for her date. They hadn't planned anything specific and were eager to get to know one another a little better. They went out to eat and ended up driving around and looking at Christmas lights, as it was one of Heather's favorite things to do during the Christmas holidays, and then later her date, Stephen Schiraldi, took her to the Inlet Mall, where he taught her how to drive a stick shift in his truck. Her date had also snapped a picture of her as she tried out driving his car. Heather sent this picture of herself having fun on her date to her best friend Brianna, whom she lived with, and her dad, Terry. The date started around 10 p.m. and ended just after 1 a.m., with Heather being dropped off at her apartment with plans to meet her date again the next day for a second date, Unfortunately, this would be the final confirmed sighting of Heather Elvis. Just over half an hour later, after having arrived back at her apartment, Heather received a call from Sydney Moorer. This was completely unexpected, as the pair had not had contact in weeks. During the 4-minute phone call, which had been made from a payphone, Sydney apologized to Heather and expressed his love for her. He even confided in her that he had left Tammy in the hopes of being with her instead. At 1:44 a.m., Heather called her roommate Brianna, who was out of town visiting relatives, in tears. She told her that Sydney had phoned her to confess his love for her. Sydney would later deny this phone call ever took place until he was forced to admit it when the police had CCTV footage of him making a call at that same payphone at that time. Heather's roommate told her to think properly about it and not mess up all the great progress she had made in the past few weeks over him. Heather said that she would think about it, do some internet browsing, and then go to bed, but Heather could not sleep that night. At 2:29 a.m., Heather tried to call the number that Sydney had previously called several times, but received no answer. At 3:16 a.m., Heather tried to call Sydney's mobile phone, but again, received no answer. Refusing to give up, Heather called Sydney's mobile phone again. This time she got through, and the phone call lasted for just over 4 minutes. What was said during this phone call is unknown, but after the call, Heather got into her car and drove to a place called Peachtree Boat Landing, a place situated just 3 miles from Sydney and Tammy's home. Sydney also later denied that this phone call took place too, until he was forced to admit it after the police confronted him with Heather's phone record. He then said that he did talk to her, but only to tell her to leave him alone. At 3:38 a.m., Heather arrived at Peachtree Boat Landing. She again tried to call Sydney's phone, but she received no answer. She tried multiple times after to call again at 3:39 a.m., 3:41 a.m., and 3:46 a.m., but there was still no answer from Sydney. When Heather was trying to reach Sydney on his mobile, 2 CCTV cameras picked up a vehicle, a black Ford F-150, which was similar to that owned by Sydney and Tammy Moorer, coming from the direction of their house and headed towards Peachtree Boat Landing. The following evening, Heather's car, which was a green Dodge Intrepid, was found parked at Peachtree Landing on the Waccamaw River by a local policeman who was patrolling the area. After running the license plate and discovering that the car was registered to Heather's father, Terry Elvis, police went to her parents' house. The police questioned Heather's dad about the car, and Terry had a spare set of keys, so they went to the car, and they noticed that her keys, ID, purse, and phone were not inside. The police then allowed Terry to search the car and then let him drive it home. Terry tried calling her over and over again, but the call would just go straight to voicemail. When the police went to her apartment, they didn't find Heather there, and they also noticed that she didn't show up for work. The search for missing Heather Elvis was now underway. Friends and family created posters and leaflets and set up the Facebook page, Find Heather Elvis. Whilst police were looking for Heather and doing their investigations, suspicions soon quickly fell on Sydney and Tammy Moorer due to the evidence of the texts, phone calls, and public knowledge of the affair between Heather and Sydney. Sydney and Tammy would also post on Facebook about the situation and spoke very disrespectfully of Heather and her family. Sydney posted, "Heather was a girl who traded fellatio for pumpkin-spiced lattes, amongst other things." Tammy also posted messages including a lengthy status. "Well, Sydney cheated on me in the months of September-October with a psycho whore who has since gone missing." Evidence against Sydney kept piling up. The detectives noted his pickup leaving the Peachtree Landing area at 3:45 a.m. They searched it and found out that he had detached the GPS system on the night of December 18th, which hindered detectives from confirming that the car on CCTV had been his. With no concrete evidence, Sydney was let go whilst detectives continued the investigation. On February 21st, 2014, Sydney and Tammy Moorer were arrested and charged with kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and 2 charges of indecent exposure after an 11-hour search. They were charged with indecent exposure for taking sexually explicit pictures of themselves in public areas, as well as obstruction of justice for lying to police about the payphone. On February 24, 2014, police held a press conference and announced that they had been charged with Heather Elvis's murder. They claimed to have discovered evidence that led them to suspect Sydney and Tammy kidnapped and murdered Heather. Sydney and Tammy were released from prison after 11 months in 2015. Their bond was set at $100,000 per person. At the bond hearing, prosecutors stated that there was no direct link between them and Heather's disappearance. The Moorer family claimed they were threatened by the Elvis family, so they had a tracking system installed and were advised to avoid the Elvis family, including on social media. The murder charges were dismissed without prejudice in March 2016, which means they could charge them again with murder if they chose to. The kidnapping charges were also reduced to pending. They also dropped the charges of indecent exposure against both of them. On June 20th, 2016, Sydney's trial for the kidnapping of Heather Elvis began, and it was revealed in court that Heather was possibly pregnant. The detectives discovered that when Sydney went to Walmart, he purchased a pregnancy test and cigars. Afterward, Sydney then went to the payphone to call Heather and then to meet up with Heather. Sydney explained that the pregnancy test was for Tammy because they were trying for a child. Even though the Moorers' home security footage showed them washing their car after December 18th, burning rags, and also having a receipt for a pregnancy test in their possession, Sydney's kidnapping charge resulted in a mistrial after the jury was hung, which occurs when the jury is unable to reach an agreement. With no body and no evidence that Sydney murdered Heather, 10 of the jury members wanted to convict him, while 2 did not. In August of 2017, Sydney went to trial again, this time for the obstruction of justice charges, and was found guilty. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Meanwhile, the prosecution made plans to retry Sydney for kidnapping in the future. In October 2018, 5 years after Heather went missing, Tammy was put on trial for kidnapping and conspiracy. At the trial, it was revealed that Tammy was infuriated by her husband's affair with Heather, especially after rumors began to circulate that Heather was pregnant in December 2013. Moreover, a family friend of the Moorers, named Donald DeMarino, testified that he saw an image of Heather on Tammy's phone at a family cookout that was held after Heather went missing. Donald mentioned that in the image, it did not appear that Heather was able to walk or talk. He was allegedly so distressed by said image that he left the cookout after seeing it. The image in question was not shown, nor were any additional details given. However, this testimony and all the other evidence provided by the prosecution were enough to convince the jury to reach a guilty verdict in a little under 2 hours. She was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison on both counts, and she was eligible for parole after serving a specific amount of time. They have never disclosed what happened to Heather Elvis that night in December 2013, and they both have been trying to appeal their convictions for years, insisting they're innocent, yet to no avail. Today, 47-year-old Sydney is incarcerated at the maximum security Lee Correctional Institution in Bishopville with a projected release date of March 31, 2044, and 50-year-old Tammy is at the medium security Leith Correctional Institution in Greenwood with a projected release date of May 9, 2043. To this day, no trace of Heather Elvis has ever been found. A tribute garden has been set up at Peachtree Boat Landing in dedication to her. Heather's disappearance left an indelible void in the lives of her family and friends. The pain they endured, the questions left unanswered, and the yearning for closure became an enduring chapter in the story of Myrtle Beach. The Myrtle Beach community, bound by a shared hope for answers, rallied together in search efforts and vigils. The story of Heather resonated far beyond the coastal town, echoing the challenges of navigating the complexities of love and relationships. As we remember Heather Rochelle Elvis, may her memory be a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of compassion and understanding. One morning around 7 a.m., a neighbor called the police to report a smoke alarm going off at a nearby house. An officer soon arrived, and after knocking several times with no response, he tried the door and found it unlocked. As he cautiously inspected each room, he made his way upstairs. What he found in the first bedroom sent chills down his spine. Inside, he found a body that appeared to be that of a teenage girl. Realizing he had discovered a crime scene, he immediately called for backup. More bodies were soon uncovered, and the investigation began to unravel the dark events that had taken place and why anyone would harm such a lovely family. This is the horrifying case of the Harris family. In today's video, we take a look at a case that took place in the town of Dryden in New York during the holiday season that involved Warren Harris and his family. For 39-year-old Warren Harris, also known as Tony, his 41-year-old wife Dolores, also known as Dodie, and their children, 15-year-old Shelby and 11-year-old Mark, Christmas had always been a cherished time, and the 1989 holiday season was no different. Dodie ran a gift shop in a renovated barn about 50 yards from their main home, while Tony held an executive position at an electronics distribution center. Their expansive house in the town of Dryden was fully decorated in anticipation of the upcoming festivities, and they went out of their way to make sure that family, friends, and visitors felt welcome. On Friday, December 22nd, Dodie spent most of the day alone. Around 4 p.m., the kids came home from school. The Finger Lakes region of New York was blanketed in snow, with more expected. As usual, the children relaxed in front of the TV while Dodie prepared dinner. Tony was expected home by about 5:30, and the afternoon was passing by swiftly. It was during this brief 90-minute window, when the three of them were alone in the house, that a killer made their move. While the exact trigger for the ensuing nightmare remains unknown, it is suspected that the ordeal began when someone knocked on the door seeking assistance. Those who knew Dodie well agreed that she would have readily allowed a stranger into the house to use the phone. It is believed that Tony arrived just as the terrifying events were unfolding. Overwhelmed and caught off guard by the horrifying events that were happening, he was unable to protect his loved ones. What is known is that by the end of the night, the sole survivor of the Harris family was a kitten named Shadow. Around 7 a.m. the following day, a neighbor called the police to report a smoke alarm going off at the Harris home. By 7:30, an officer arrived at 1886 Ellis Hollow Road. After several unanswered knocks, the officer tried the door and found it unlocked. Upon entering, he smelled a faint hint of smoke, similar to what one might expect from a kitchen accident. It was only when he saw a gas can in the living room that he suspected the fire might have been intentionally started. As he moved through the seemingly deserted house, he observed that the power was out and the phone lines were cut. The oppressive silence throughout the rooms created an unsettling atmosphere, suggesting that if anyone else was present, they were no longer alive. After carefully ascending the stairs, he peered into the first bedroom and made a harrowing discovery. Inside the scorched room lay the body of what appeared to be a teenage girl. Realizing he had encountered a crime scene, he promptly called for backup. While awaiting reinforcements, the officer surveyed the room, taking care not to disturb the evidence. It was clear from the girl's condition that she had been shot in the head, and her partial nudity suggested she had been sexually assaulted. Although she was not restrained, she was blindfolded. Next to her on the floor was the body of a dog, deceased, but without visible signs of trauma. When the officer moved to a nearby bedroom, he found 3 more victims, 2 adults and a child. All had been hogtied and shot execution style with pillowcases over their heads. Despite signs of burning, the damage to the bodies was minimal. By the end of the morning, the victims were confirmed to be Tony, Dodie, Shelby, and Mark Harris. As detectives searched the property for evidence, they noted that the family's van was missing from the garage. Later that day, the vehicle was discovered abandoned in a local mall parking lot, likely by the perpetrator or perpetrators. The medical examiner determined that Shelby had been tortured and sexually assaulted before being killed. It was estimated that the family's suffering had lasted from around 6 to 10 p.m. Investigators found that gasoline had been poured upstairs and set ablaze to destroy evidence, but the fire had mostly extinguished itself, preserving much of the crime scene. Curiously, it appeared that the murder sites had been thoroughly cleaned afterward, leading detectives to suspect that the perpetrator or perpetrators might have had professional janitorial experience. During interviews with the neighbors, one recalled seeing a black male on a bicycle riding up and down the street just before dark the previous evening. Since it got dark around 5 p.m., this would place the cyclist near the Harris home while Dodie and her children were preparing for dinner. Given that the only tire tracks in the freshly fallen snow were from the family's van, it seemed probable that the killer arrived by a different mode of transportation. Earlier that evening, a woman driving home with her young child had noticed a man matching the description struggling on his bike along the snowy highway. Although she had considered offering him a ride, she decided against it due to her fussy toddler. Unbeknownst to her at the time, her decision likely spared her life. When the news of the murders spread, investigators also discovered that the family's credit cards had been used to buy hundreds of dollars worth of clothing, jewelry, and electronics at the mall where the van was found. After interviewing the clerks who processed the transactions, a composite sketch of the suspects was created. Once these images were shared with the public, tips identified the suspects as 54-year-old Shirley King and her 33-year-old son, Michael, who also went by the name Anthony Turner. Investigations revealed that Shirley worked part-time as a house cleaner and at the reservation desk of a well-known bed and breakfast. Her son, who had worked intermittently as a janitor, had a criminal record showing a preference for robbery over conventional employment. As the investigation progressed, another neighbor came forward, reporting that he had seen a black male with an older female driving the Harris' van past his house at 6:50 a.m. After seeing the sketches of Michael and Shirley King, he confirmed they were the individuals he had observed. Since this sighting occurred just minutes before the police were alerted about the smoke alarm, it was considered a significant lead. Unfortunately for the investigators, the witness later retracted his statement, admitting he hadn't seen the two clearly enough to make a reliable identification. On February 7, 1990, police went to the apartment where Michael King was living with his girlfriend and their 2-year-old child. When he did not respond to their knock, they forced entry. Inside, they found King sitting with a shotgun. He fired a shot before being gunned down by the officers. A ballistics expert later confirmed that King's weapon was the same one used to kill the Harris family. While some doubted the details of the confrontation, King's history with law enforcement provided insight into his mindset. It was reported that after one of his many encounters with police, he had allegedly expressed a desire to be shot by them rather than face a long prison sentence, suggesting he had chosen suicide by cop. With the main suspect out of the way, detectives shifted their focus to his mother, Shirley. Although both had been spotted at the mall using the Harris' credit cards, it was Shirley who had forged Dodie's name on the receipts. When confronted with this incriminating evidence, she admitted to using the cards and knowing their source but denied any involvement in the murders. Nonetheless, her knowledge of the killings for 6 weeks led to speculation about her deeper involvement. After considering their options, authorities charged her with burglary, arson, possession of stolen property, and forgery. While investigators believed Shirley had been present at the crime scene at some point, they were not fully convinced of her role in the actual murders. If she was involved, it seemed more likely that she was an accessory after the fact rather than a direct participant in the violence. During the trial, a gas can found at the Harris home on the morning the bodies were discovered was presented as evidence. An officer testified that fingerprints on the can matched those of Shirley King. With undeniable proof of her presence at the crime scene, the jury quickly convicted her on all charges. Shirley was sentenced to 17 to 44 years in prison and was formally handed over to the state, closing the case. However, 2.5 years later, an internal investigation revealed that the law enforcement officer had planted the fingerprint evidence to strengthen the case against Shirley King. Following this explosive revelation, Shirley King's conviction was overturned and she was released from custody. In the subsequent months, all charges against her were dropped and her previous convictions were annulled. In 2007, Shirley King filed a lawsuit against the state of New York for $500 million. Ultimately, she received around $286,000 in compensatory damages. Although she had indeed been wronged, some in the community resented the large settlement. They argued that she had benefited from her son's crimes without showing any remorse for the victims, questioning her entitlement to such a significant payout. Despite this, the decision remained, and she left with the money. Years went by, and Shirley King passed away in 2015 at the age of 80, taking any remaining secrets with her to the grave. Although the complete details of what the Harris family experienced during their final hours will never be fully known, it was unquestionably a night of unrelenting terror. After examining the evidence, it is clear that their suffering at the hands of a stranger they had welcomed into their home out of kindness is truly horrifying. The thought that Tony, Dodie, and Mark were forced to hear Shelby being assaulted in the next room only intensifies the heart-wrenching nature of their ordeal. Demonstrating that animals can sometimes show more compassion than people, the family dog, Annie, chose to remain by Shelby's side rather than seeking safety as flames engulfed the home's second floor. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Annie stayed close to the teenager she had loved and known, choosing to offer comfort rather than escape. Unfortunately, after staying by her side all night, she eventually succumbed to smoke inhalation. It is both tragic and heart-wrenching what the victims of this story endured at the hands of these monsters, despite the kindness extended to them by their hosts. As we reflect on this sorrowful tale, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were cruelly taken and the loved ones who mourn their loss. One day, while a man was in the barracks reading his Bible, a fellow soldier burst in with an urgent message. He was informed that something terrible had occurred at his home, but he was unaware of how severe the situation was. He was then taken back home, where he discovered that his family had been caught in a fire at their house, and sadly, none had survived. Investigations revealed unusual circumstances surrounding the fire, showing that none of the victims had died from smoke or the fire itself, but instead, each family member had stab wounds, indicating that this was not an accident, but a case of murder. The question was, who could have committed such a crime in such a quiet and peaceful neighborhood? This is the chilling case of the Milken family. In 1989, Pavel Milken relocated his family from Estonia to the United States. Originally of Russian descent, they had lived in Ukraine before moving to Estonia. They moved there with the hope of improving their lives and opportunities, and luckily enough, they got a sponsor in Everett, Washington. Pavel quickly found work as a welder and secured an apartment for his family before eventually settling in a home in Mill Creek. He recalled that upon their arrival in the US, he spoke no English but was struck by the warmth of the Americans. His son, Leonid Milken, born on September 6, 1976, was a teenager at the time, and it wasn't long before he started to build his own American dream with a family of his own. Leonid eventually met Olga, and from the moment they crossed paths, he was drawn to her caring nature. He quickly realized he was in love and wanted her to be his wife. While Olga was outgoing and made sure everyone felt included, Leonid was more quiet and reserved. The couple married on January 24, 1998, when he was 21 and she was 20. Born on July 21, 1977, in Russia, Olga was one of 5 daughters born to her mother, Lyubov Botvina. Her family's journey was similar to the Milkens. Both families were of Russian descent and had emigrated to the United States. Olga's mother worked as a fiscal specialist at the University of Washington. Lyubov lovingly raised her daughters, devoting all her time to them. Olga was close with all her sisters, particularly Lyubov, who was known as Luba to differentiate from their mother. Luba was born on November 26, 1981, and like Olga, she was a devout Christian, actively involved in her church, Christian Faith Center. She was pursuing studies at Seattle Pacific University to become a translator for a hospital and was highly committed to her education. Though she lived in Seattle, she often spent her free time at her sister's home in Kirkland. Luba was known for her sweetness, generosity, and the inspiration she brought to both friends and family. Leonid's parents loved Olga and her sisters as if they were their own. The Botvinas and Milkens were like one big, happy family, embracing each other warmly. The two families frequently gathered for dinners and shared in life's joys, including the births of Olga and Leonid's 2 sons, Justin and Andrew. Justin Daniel Milken, born on August 29, 2000, was described as a curious and lively child, inheriting Olga's creativity. Andrew Benjamin Milken was born on August 21, 2002, and he looked up to his older brother, wanting to be just like Justin. Andrew was thoughtful but strong-willed. Both boys were described as sweet and joyful. After the birth of his second son, Leonid joined the Washington National Guard in November 2002. He was stationed at the Tacoma Armory and served with Alpha Company, 341st Military Intelligence Battalion. His family took great pride in his service, with his sons often saluting him and wearing his uniforms around the house. On the other hand, Olga worked as a dental assistant in Bellevue. In 2003, Leonid and Olga purchased their first home in Kirkland, Washington, fulfilling a long-held dream. The house, built in 1914, required some renovations, but the couple eagerly planned to remodel it together. However, in September 2005, Leonid, who worked in military intelligence, volunteered for deployment to Iraq, where his skills were in high demand. It was a difficult decision for the family, but they believed it was a worthwhile sacrifice. Both Olga and Leonid committed to staying strong during his absence, speaking daily whenever they could connect as they held on to hope and made plans for their future once he returned home. Neighbors described Olga as incredibly strong. Even with Leonid away, she remained upbeat and was always in good spirits. Both Olga and Leonid's families provided support, with Luba moving in for the summer to help out. A few months after Leonid's departure, Olga decided to leave her job at the dental office to focus entirely on her sons. She had always wanted to be a full-time mother, and now spent her days engaging in activities with the boys and closely monitoring their education. She held phone conferences with Justin's teacher twice a week to ensure he was not only excelling academically, but also socializing well with his classmates. Olga and the children attended 2 church services each week, starting with the American church in the morning and the Russian church in the evening. Like the rest of her family, she was deeply committed to her faith and also made sure her sons followed her footsteps as well. On July 17, 2006, Leonid was in the barracks reading his Bible when a fellow soldier rushed in, informing him of an urgent message from the Red Cross. But before we dive further into this story, Leonid was then led to the chaplain's office where his firearm and extra ammunition were taken from him before he was informed of an accident. He knew something terrible had occurred, but couldn't fathom the extent of it. He was promptly flown back to the States. At 11:32 a.m., a fire was reported on the 9500 block of Slater Avenue by a neighbor. Firefighters took an hour to put out the flames and another 4 hours before they could start their investigation. No emergency call had come from inside the house, and the fire appeared to have started randomly. Once the scene was stable, investigators found 4 victims. In an upstairs bedroom were the bodies of Olga and Luba, and in the adjacent hallway were Justin and Andrew. Initially, it was believed they died from smoke inhalation, but the timing of the fire seemed suspicious. According to other family members, Olga and the children wouldn't have been asleep at that time, so they couldn't understand how they failed to escape the house, or at least call for help. It simply didn't make sense at all. The ATF, fire officials along with search dogs were brought in to further investigate the cause of the fire. It was determined that the fire was intentionally set, with gasoline used as an accelerant at various points inside the home. After the bodies were removed, they were sent to the King County Coroner's Office for autopsies. The autopsies revealed that none of the victims died from smoke or fire-related injuries. Each had stab wounds to their upper bodies and heads, with the children also having wounds to their throats. This had become a murder case. As they sifted through the debris, Kirkland officials collected any potential evidence, including a set of bloody clothes, a hunting knife, a flashlight, and a partially burned glove. The police then began interviewing neighbors for any signs of suspicious activity. Around the time of the fire on July 18, 2006, these interviews led to 2 women who described seeing a man near the Milkins' home. The suspect was reportedly seen around the property with what looked like a container. He was described as a white male in his mid-20s with a distinctive green dragon tattoo on his left bicep. When given this description, another neighbor identified it as matching Connor Shearman, the newest resident in the area. Connor lived across the street from the Milkins in a duplex, having moved in just 2 weeks earlier, and had been unfriendly to neighbors who tried to introduce themselves, as they also reported that he mostly kept to himself. The police approached Connor at his residence and immediately noticed he matched the description precisely, including the tattoo, and had noticeable scratches on his face and a puncture wound on his left forearm. When asked about the Milkins, Connor claimed he didn't know them. Further questioned about his wounds, he said he had stopped a fight at a nearby gas station earlier that day. After interviewing Connor, investigators were convinced he was their suspect and proceeded to the AM/PM convenience store to verify his alibi. The footage from the store showed no fight in the parking lot, but did capture Connor leaving with a red gas canister. On the morning of July 19th, Connor was arrested. Once in custody, he admitted to his involvement, but described his experience as waking from one nightmare into another. He explained that on July 16th, he drank 3 bottles of vodka late into the night and blacked out. When he came to the next morning, he found himself in the Milkins' master bedroom, covered in blood, surrounded by the 4 victims, with no memory of the previous night. He changed out of his bloody clothes, took a shower, and dressed in hospital scrubs he found before heading to the convenience store. At the AM/PM, he filled the red gas canister and then returned to the Milkin home, where he spread the accelerant around before setting the house on fire. Believing he had escaped detection, he went back home and went to bed. Connor insisted that he committed the arson under the mistaken belief that he had not killed the family. He thought that if he didn't destroy the evidence, the police wouldn't believe his story, and of course, they didn't. The blackout theory became a major point of debate, as investigators felt he had enough presence of mind to attempt a cover-up. Additionally, the wounds on his arms and face suggested a struggle had taken place. However, the motive was unclear. Nobody could figure out why Connor would target the Milkins. Friends and colleagues described him as passionate, well-mannered, and intelligent. Connor, who admitted to being an alcoholic and drug addict, was a patient at the Lakeside Milam Recovery Center. After completing his program, he moved to a halfway house before settling into the Kirkland duplex with a roommate. Program members said Connor was an ordinary individual. He worked at the Carillion Point business and hotel complex for about a year and a half, performing general maintenance without causing issues, and had no prior criminal record. During questioning, investigators searched Connor's residence and found a pair of running shoes with traces of blood and gasoline. The shoe treads also matched the footprints found at and near the Milkins' home. With his confession and evidence linking him to the scene, Connor was formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. He remained in custody at the King County Jail until his arraignment on July 31, 2006. While waiting for the trial to progress, Leonid organized a memorial service with his extended family to honor their lost loved ones. On July 23, 2006, at City Church in Kirkland, nearly the entire community came together to pay their respects to the 4 victims. The church was filled to capacity, with mourners grappling with the incomprehensible tragedy. Leonid sought solace by relying on friends and family to help him through this devastating time. He noted that, while he had witnessed real violence in Iraq, he never expected such brutality to strike his own family. He anticipated this kind of violence from a war-torn country, but not from America. Connor appeared in court on July 31st, entering a plea of not guilty, with a bond set at $10 million. The state announced its intention to seek the death penalty. Shortly after his arraignment, Connor's attorney filed a motion to dismiss the murder charges following the accidental release of 300 pages of case files and evidence by the Kirkland Police Department to a local TV station. In the motion, his attorney argued that the release of the case files was a deliberate attempt by the media and police to try the case in the press before he had even entered a plea. But the motion was denied. It took over 3 years for the trial to commence due to the high-profile nature of the case. Jury selection began in November 2009, with questioning concluding several weeks later, setting the trial date for January 20, 2010. The trial lasted 11 weeks, during which the prosecution presented DNA evidence. Connor's DNA was found in several locations inside the home, including on a pair of men's shorts and on the glove and knife. Olga's DNA was detected on the necklace Connor was wearing at the time of his arrest and on the soles of his recovered shoes. On March 16, 2010, the prosecution rested its case. The defense focused significantly on expert testimony from addiction specialist Dr. Sweeney, who testified that blackouts from heavy drinking were quite common. Typically, a blackout lasts no more than 6 hours, during which individuals can walk and talk but cannot recall their actions. It was established that Connor had 4 times the legal limit of alcohol in his system. The defense rested on April 5, 2010, without Connor taking the stand. Closing arguments took place 3 days later, with the prosecution arguing that the murders were premeditated and aggravated, thus warranting the death penalty. They contended that voluntary intoxication causing a blackout did not constitute a valid legal defense. The defense did not dispute Connor's involvement, but argued that the evidence pointed to someone else as the killer, or that Connor's level of intoxication precluded the intent required for a first-degree aggravated murder conviction. The case concluded with the jury deliberating for 9 hours before delivering their verdict on April 12, 2010. The jury found Connor guilty of 4 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree arson. The penalty phase commenced on April 19, 2010. The prosecution called 4 members of the victims' families to testify, each describing their lives and the profound effect the deaths had on them. In contrast, the defense sought to humanize Connor, bringing in several character witnesses, including family, friends, and teachers who discussed his troubled upbringing. Connor had a history of childhood abuse that contributed to his addictions. During this phase, Connor took the stand and expressed regret to the victims' families, though he did not admit to the murders. Tearfully, he said, "I may not have the right to ask anything of you, but I'm asking for mercy. If not for me, then for those who love me." After 2 weeks of testimonies, the jury returned a special findings verdict on May 8, 2010, recommending the death penalty for Connor. On May 27, 2010, Connor was officially sentenced to death. At his sentencing, Connor again refused to apologize to the families and maintained his innocence, arguing that the death penalty would be an act of vengeance and not justice. Both Leonid and Olga's families were satisfied with the verdict, believing justice had been served. Following his sentencing, Connor was moved to the Washington State Penitentiary to await execution on death row. Right after the verdict was announced, Connor's attorney informed the court of plans to appeal to the Washington Supreme Court, citing issues with jury selection and prejudicial comments made by the prosecution. In 2014, a suspension of the death penalty in Washington was declared. However, this did not halt legal proceedings related to the death penalty that had begun before this declaration. On April 12, 2018, Connor's case was reviewed again, following the motion filed by his attorney, and the Washington Supreme Court upheld both his conviction and sentence. Nevertheless, 6 months later, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously in a separate case that the Washington death penalty was unconstitutional. Consequently, Connor and 7 other death row inmates had their sentences commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Connor's defense team asserted that while Connor was a good person, he was convicted of a terrible crime, and they contended that the true events of July 17th remained unknown, and they firmly believed that Connor was never the perpetrator. After the trial concluded, Leonid was able to rebuild the family home with the support from his community, as many volunteers organized fundraisers and opened a bank account and even held garage sales. Leonid was deeply moved by the community's response. Initially surprised, he soon realized this was how a community comes together in times of tragedy. Those who participated in the effort believed that no one deserved such support more than he did. Leonid viewed his rebuilt home as a tribute to his family and felt it no longer reflected the site of the murders, but rather a memory of his beautiful and loving family. The devastating and heartbreaking events inflicted on the victims by this merciless perpetrator are deeply distressing. As we reflect on this horrific story, our hearts and minds are with those whose lives were tragically cut short and the grieving loved ones they left behind. How many grams of pure arsenic will kill a human? Is arsenic detectable in autopsy? Top 5 undetectable poisons that show no signs of foul play. These are some of the haunting queries found in the Google search history of a dentist who allegedly murdered his wife in Aurora, Colorado that date back to February 27, 2023. Love, they say, has the power to transform and reveal the best in people and the dark side as well. For 45-year-old dentist James Craig, the dark side seemed to eclipse his 22-year marriage, ultimately leading to the poisoning of his lifelong partner, 43-year-old Angela Craig. This is the grim story of Angela and James Craig. James and Angela Craig, the couple who radiated perfection in the eyes of the public, appeared to have an impeccable marriage and a flawless family. Their story was a beacon of admiration for all. Their social media posts and James Craig's eloquent press release painted a vivid picture of his joyous matrimony to Angela, his partner in life, accompanied by their 6 children, and together they all reveled in the thrill of outdoor adventures, from camping and fishing to exhilarating snowboarding escapades, among others. However, beneath the surface of their seemingly flawless union, and as is often the case in any marriage, lay hidden complexities that bore its share of internal struggles. James, a compulsive gambler, worsened his financial woes with each ill-fated bet. Every attempt to turn his luck around only sent him spiraling deeper into the abyss of losses and debt. His fortune had also dwindled significantly, drained by dubious business ventures and ill-fated forays into the world of cryptocurrency, leaving him drowning in insurmountable debt. In a desperate bid for a quick fix, he had ventured to Las Vegas only to squander $2,000 in a futile attempt to reverse his fortunes. In a shocking revelation to her sister Toni, Angela disclosed that her husband James had driven his dental practice to the brink of ruin, forcing Angela to at times step in and help run the dental practice when James couldn't afford to hire additional staff. Their marriage was marred by James's infidelity with multiple women, and despite numerous attempts to break free, Angela found herself ensnared by his persuasive charm. The darkest chapter unfolded when James drugged Angela 5 or 6 years ago, confessing it was to prevent her from thwarting his attempt to take his own life. This harrowing incident would later play a pivotal role in the unfolding investigation, as evidenced by a series of revealing text messages presented later on in the video. Angela's recent visit to her sister in Utah from March 1st to March 5th painted a starkly different picture. She returned home after visiting her sister in Utah from March 1st to March 5th, radiating good health and positivity, a testament to her regular fitness regimen with not a single complaint to be heard. On March 6th, Angela's husband prepared her usual protein shake before their daily workout, a routine they both followed without issue. Little did she know that while she was away visiting her sister, James had been scouring the internet for lethal poisons, receiving a delivery of arsenic on March 4th. He clandestinely blended this deadly concoction into her protein shake, and as she sipped it, an unsettling dizziness and weakness overcame her. Angela sought help at Parker Adventist Hospital, where she was discharged the same day. Unaware of the dark truth, her family dismissed her condition as yet another bout of routine sinus infections, not realizing the sinister reality unfolding. On March 9th, she was readmitted to the hospital, her symptoms worsening, and the doctors remained baffled. Throughout this ordeal, James maintained contact with their close friends, Ryan and Michelle Redfern, who had no inkling of the dark secrets lurking beneath the surface. Ryan, not just a friend but a trusted business partner, had even lent a helping hand during James's financial struggles in a bid to salvage their dental practice. Michelle, drawing on her nursing background, frequently inquired about Angela's diagnosis, eager to unravel the mystery behind her illness and identify any potential oversights by the medical professionals. Initially, he brushed Michelle off, insisting that they had more than enough support. However, Michelle's persistence in checking on her friend led her to keep a close watch on Angela's progress through texts. He played the part of a concerned husband, sending updates when prompted, albeit with questionable messages and untimely jokes. Simultaneously, he engaged in text exchanges with his wife in the hospital, offering love while still maintaining an inappropriate sense of humor. Meanwhile, he led a double life, spending time with his secret lover, Karen Kane, a married orthodontist from Marble Falls in Texas. He had arranged for Karen to fly to Colorado from March 8th to March 10th, coinciding with the period his wife was hospitalized, all part of a sinister plan taking shape. This sinister plot was not a one-time occurrence. The orthodontist was scheduled to visit James for a second time from March 16th to 20, a flight ticket already purchased on March 4th. It appeared that this newfound love was the driving force behind James's desire to eliminate his wife from the equation. However, the lover seemed unaware of James's dark deeds despite knowing Angela was unwell and in the hospital. James, instead of displaying genuine concern and support for his ailing wife, sent ill-timed messages filled with desires rather than empathy. Angela, determined to recover, brushed off his advances, focusing on her health. Angela's ordeal took a darker turn when she was released on March 14th, only to be readmitted on March 15th, this time at University Hospital in Colorado, where she was taken by her brother Mark Prey, deepening the mysteries surrounding her illness. James informed the couple about Angela's deteriorating condition, prompting them to rush to the hospital separately from their different locations. In the midst of this, Ryan received a revealing call from the dental practice, uncovering the startling truth lurking behind closed doors. The information uncovered the origin of the sudden mysterious illness that had befallen Angela, who had also already started suspecting foul play. Confronted by Angela's accusations, James responded, "Given our history, I know that must be triggering. Just for the record, I didn't drug you." Back at the dental practice as well, Caitlin, the office manager, recalled a personal package that James had instructed her not to open. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. The discovery unfolded in an unexpected way. Another employee unintentionally unsealed the package that was supposed to remain untouched. It was only a matter of time before Caitlin stumbled upon it, completely forgetting it was James's personal parcel, and peeked inside. She saw inside a biohazard labeled canister with the ominous words, "Potassium cyanide." On realizing the package was James's, she sealed and returned it to James, who seemed completely unaware of her actions. A Google search brought chilling revelations. Angela's symptoms perfectly aligned with the effects of potassium cyanide ingestion, including vomiting, low blood pressure, and nausea. Suspicion grew like a dark cloud, pointing squarely at James as the prime suspect in a sinister poisoning plot. Caitlin had also perhaps recalled their earlier conversations and pieced together a crucial detail. James told her that he had prepared a protein shake for Angela on the very day her illness began. This revelation deepened the web of suspicion surrounding him. Adding to the intrigue were James's peculiar behaviors, staying late at work on non-working days when no patients were scheduled and sneaking into exam room 9 at the end of the hallway and using a different computer while in the dark than the one in his personal office. The web of deceit was tightening around James, leaving Caitlin increasingly alarmed. At the time, Caitlin didn't dwell on it. James had also confided in her about Angela's accusations of poisoning, a revelation that left her deeply troubled. Sharing her concerns with her colleague Jacqueline set the wheels in motion. Jacqueline calls and promptly informs Ryan about the unsettling information. Ryan, deeply concerned, alerted a nurse about the suspicion that Angela might have been poisoned by her own husband using potassium cyanide. Following protocol, the nurse contacted the police, initiating a critical investigation. Tragically, by this point, Angela had been declared brain dead, and James received the devastating news that she would be taken off life support. It was at this juncture that Ryan and Michelle, now in the same car, began discussing the unfolding drama. The sinister plot had reached a critical juncture, and the truth was beginning to surface. In a tense and chilling moment, James made a call to Ryan, and with the phone being connected to the car's Bluetooth speaker, it ensured that they both heard every word. James confronted Ryan, aware that disturbing information had originated from him. Ryan admitted to knowing about the secret package. James attempted to spin a tangled web of excuses, claiming the package held an engagement ring meant to surprise Angela. But Ryan saw through the deception, declaring he knew it contained potassium cyanide and demanding an explanation. Finally, James confessed that it was indeed potassium cyanide, but he concocted a disturbing tale. He alleged that Angela had asked him to obtain it, as she'd been grappling with suicidal thoughts ever since he'd requested a divorce in December 2022. He ordered the poison for her, believing it was a dangerous game of brinksmanship, describing the situation as a game of chicken, not realizing she'd actually consume it. Ryan urged James to stop talking and instead get himself a lawyer, but the die was cast. The Major Crimes Homicide Unit had already launched their investigation. The detective reached out to Child Protective Services caseworker Sydney Romero, who was deeply concerned about James's statements regarding Angela's supposed suicidal tendencies. Sydney found James's claims to be highly suspect as they conflicted with reality. He alleged that Angela had deliberately overdosed on opioids multiple times and claimed he had single-handedly revived her without reporting these incidents or seeking professional help. What made this even more dubious was that none of their children had any knowledge of these supposed events despite living under the same roof. Sydney had already previously met with James and the kids, giving her a clear perspective on the family dynamics. The absence of any mention of these incidents raised serious questions about who was weaving a web of deceit and deception. The truth was unraveling and the stakes were escalating. James, realizing he was sinking into a perilous abyss, desperately sought an ally in his dark hour. On the morning of March 16th, he dispatched a series of texts to Ryan, some of which contained the following words. James's desperation to manipulate his friend was palpable, but fortunately his ploy yielded no results. In his text, he even tried to place blame on his friend for the predicament of his kids who were unable to return to the comfort of their home as they had found the police awaiting them at the doorstep. The police, armed with a search warrant, demanded James's phone, Angela's phone, his wallet, and his laptop. He reluctantly handed them over, along with the passcodes. He informed them that his laptop was at the dental office. The police also photographed his credit cards, ID, and driver's license before returning them. Their search continued at James's residence, where they seized various items believed to be relevant to the case. These included assorted protein powders, workout-style shakers, a computer tablet, 2 unmarked bags containing white powdery substances, and a water bottle discovered on the exercise bike in the main bedroom area. Notably, they failed to locate a hard drive that might have contained surveillance data from security cameras. The detectives then proceeded to James's workplace, where they secured his laptop and its password. Inside a small hand vacuum, they discovered a mysterious white substance, a portion of which was carefully collected and taken as evidence. They also retrieved a hard drive from the exam room 9 that James had used suspiciously. Delving deeper into the investigation, they accessed Angela's phone text messages, confirming her conversations with James. His contact was saved as the boy, with a picture of them, and the number matched the one provided by Ryan and Michelle. The most chilling discovery occurred when they connected the hard drive to a television, revealing James's alarming Google search history. It included the creation of a new email account to conduct searches such as how many grams of pure arsenic will kill a human, which led to a website detailing lethal doses. They also found a search related to whether arsenic is detectable in an autopsy, originating from the Carlson Company. In James's YouTube search history, a series of unsettling titles emerged, including Top 5 Undetectable Poisons That Show No Signs of Foul Play, How to Make Poison, and Top 10 Deadliest Plants, in brackets, They Can Kill You. The investigation had taken a dark and disturbing turn, unveiling a web of sinister research and unsettling intentions. Further chilling revelations emerged as the investigation deepened. James's searches included oleandrin, along with inquiries on how to create poison from oleander, and even a Google search on acquiring oleander. Disturbingly, he had purchased $330 worth of this deadly plant, but law enforcement had intervened, seizing the package during its delivery. As detectives combed through his emails, they uncovered correspondence with Cassie Rodriguez, an employee of Midland Scientific. This was the same company from which he had procured the potassium cyanide. James had persistently inquired about his delayed order, citing medical use, and provided credentials, which the company had eventually approved. His impatience was palpable as he desperately sought the dangerous substance to expedite his sinister plan. The investigation uncovered that James had been poisoning Angela even during her hospital stay, all while pretending to care for her. In a shocking twist, an email from his mistress lover hinted that he had shared a foreboding secret about Angela's condition. She consoled James, believing Angela was succumbing to natural causes. She expressed profound sympathy, wishing she could help him instead of pulling him away. She acknowledged the immense difficulty he must be facing and offered her presence. However, she drew the line at pretending to be just a friend when there was clearly something more between them. Tragically, on March 18, 2023, Angela passed away, leaving behind their 6 children. Suspicion deepened as James refused an autopsy, a move that only intensified the cloud of guilt hanging over him. If he were truly innocent and genuinely concerned, one would expect a desire to uncover the mysterious cause of his wife's death. The next morning, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the tragic case of Angela Craig. The shocking climax to this dark tale was now in full view. On March 23, 2023, James made a solemn entrance into the courtroom. He appeared with his head lowered, hands in cuffs and ankles restrained, clad in the unmistakable orange jumpsuit of the Arapahoe County Detention Center. His gaze avoided the eyes of family and friends present, and he entered a plea of not guilty. As of October 2023, James Craig appeared in Arapahoe County Court and again pleaded not guilty, with his trial being set for April 19, 2024. The jury trial will run across 3 weeks in the spring of 2024. Angela's obituary celebrated her as a devoted, committed, and loving individual, showing unwavering loyalty to her children, family, and friends. Remarkably, she remained loyal even to the man who had betrayed their love and ultimately led to her tragic end. If you found the video compelling, drop a like and subscribe to the channel and leave your thoughts in the comment.